And welcome back to Entrepreneurs LGBTQ International. And it's my pleasure to introduce you Mark Vogler. He used to be involved very close with wine business in Sonoma with some projects there. But today he is going to talk about his last expedition to Antarctica because he's been in that side of the world lately. And also, well, we're going to explore more about those questions. But Mark, hello, welcome.
Hi, Aaron. How are you?
I am doing good in lockdown.
Great, right? Yeah, stranded. I have my hashtag stranded in the States. We'll have to do, parked in Peru. And
Well, you were close
yeah,
actually. You were close. If the
very
borders were
close.
open when you were actually coming back from Antarctica, that was one of the options. And we were texting. I was telling you,
We
if
were.
you need to stop in Lima, just you have my home open.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And be careful because I'll take you up on that at some point. We'll
You
get your
can
mom
come
to try that pineapple
anytime.
upside down cake.
As
Thank
soon
you.
as you bring wine from that side of the world, from Sonoma, I have
Always.
the pisco, so we are ready for the party.
We're good. Let's do it. Right? It'll
Mhm.
be a little private party, socially distant, but it's all good. No, thank you. So thank you for having me on, and thank you for the friendship over the years, for sure.
Oh,
And it's a pleasure always.
but tell us about your last expedition to
Yeah.
Antarctica. Tell us
Okay.
about those penguins. Tell us
Right.
what you have been
Right.
doing there because you you jump from being in Sonoma for a long time and exploring that
Yeah.
area, the wine, and actually promoting the area
Yeah.
to actually go to this expedition. So tell us about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So it's funny as I've thought about the thread of my life and around LGBT tourism, it's not, even though they're completely different worlds, Sonoma Valley, wine country, and Antarctica, there's a common thread. When I conceived of Out in the Vineyard and Gay Wine Weekend, it was after doing some traveling globally, and around 2008, the market was crashing, but I was in the wine business and realized once I joined the business, gay friends from around the world started asking me questions about wine and what were the best wineries to go to and where could they go have a fun party in a vineyard. And at that time, Proposition 8 had passed. So marriage equality wasn't allowed. There was not gay marriage in California. And, I was talking to the brand managers of the world's largest wine company that I worked for. I had built the online channel for the Americas for Treasury Wine Estates that owns 75 wineries globally. And so I was talking to them saying, why are you not talking to the gay market? Why are
Mhm.
you not talking to us? We're well-traveled, about lifestyle, and we drink, and we love wine. Why are you not target marketing us? Why are you not inviting us to come up to Beringer or Chateau St. Jean or in Australia to Penfolds? And they looked at me like I was crazy. They didn't know what I was talking about. And so I said, you need to start, because they were starting to struggle with the traffic coming to the wineries in 2008. And
Mhm.
so, because the economy was failing. And so I'd been talking about this, like, ask the gays, talk to the gays, talk to the gays. So they came to me, Behringer said, okay, we have a month left in the fiscal year. Put your money where your mouth is and bring some gays to the winery. I said, what do we do? I said, have a tea dance. And this is how it started. You might have gotten the same story from Gary. And so I reached out to Gary and said, Gary, this is going to happen. What do you think? And at first he was like, oh, it'll never happen. And then, you guys, you'll never do it. I said, no, come on. I convinced him. And we had, in about 3 weeks marketing, that's all the amount of time I had, 350 people showed up at Behringer. And gays who were wine club members who said, thank you for doing this. We didn't know you knew we even existed as gay buyers. And it went on from there. And you got that story from Gary. It's blown up into a really great event, and the only gay wine festival in the world. And so what happened to transition, to make a short answer long, to get to your question, it's the same thing that happened to me when I went to Antarctica the first time. So I was working in the wine business and I went to Antarctica and it was absolutely mind blowing. And I looked around, and the thought around expeditions is that it's very heteronormative, right? It's very much about, the perception is that it's like um, very rugged, straight, like oil workers or, you know, people who work in that industry have to be super butch. And what I found was that wasn't necessarily the case. But more importantly, after I went on that first trip, and I couldn't shut up about it, I just kept talking and posting and writing about Antarctica, which led to a year later, that same expedition company came back to me and said, we noticed what you're doing. If we sponsor you as a travel writer and content creator, will you go to the Arctic and do it for us there? Yes. Absolutely. Let me think about this. Yes. And so with those together, friends started reaching out to me. First, they said, why are you going there? Gay friends. We like to go to the beach. We like to go to the Caribbean. We like to go to Ibiza and take our clothes off, our shirts off, right? Why are you going to the cold place? And then what happened a few years later, those same people started asking me, how did you get there? How did you do this? And so what I realized was that much like the wine business, the expedition industry was not talking to the gay market at all. And so I needed to change that, right? So I ended up being, having an assignment by Man About World. Ed Salvato sent me back. I pitched a story and called The Ultimate White Party, Antarctica, right? How do we make the LGBT community understand that this is a viable place to go, in a really unique place? And it's not as ungay friendly as you think. So that was one side. The other side was literally just falling in love with it. And I found myself going back there every year as a writer. And the more I did it, the more I realized I wanted to be the guy driving the Zodiac. That's where I felt most myself. Not Mark, not gay Mark, just a guy in the wilderness. And I mean, certainly I'm gay, right? And like, oh, that guy's hot. And so I knew I needed, I knew I needed to come out again, right? So I fell in love with this. It became my muse, and I knew, but I was afraid, right? I mean, at 50, how do you completely change your life? I had a successful gay wine travel and event company. I had a partner of 20 years, great home, and I was incredibly unhappy. But really what did it was someone asked me that question that sometimes people ask: if you were on your deathbed, what would you regret? And I didn't even hesitate. It popped right in my head. And I heard myself say to myself, I would regret not being brave enough to do this, to follow what's in my heart and go work in Antarctica. And at that moment, I decided to. And so I got training. I had already started the training, actually. I was flirting with it. So I did some boating training at the US Coast Guard Academy here. And there's a naval Marine Academy on San Francisco Bay. And I started taking some boating, like international merchant marine boating classes, just sort of as hobbies. And I just realized when I got asked that question, this has to be more than a hobby. This has to be. And so I did. And that was scary. Don't get me wrong. It sounds wonderful and romantic. And, you know, all those questions about how do I make this big change? That's great when you're 20 or 25, but I have this entire thing set up. Why do I risk it? And it was, for me, it really was like coming out again. I had to tell my partner, I had to tell my mom, and I had to tell friends and tell my business and sort of own who I was. And I think it was probably more scary for me than coming out at 25, because there was a much bigger financial risk. And I knew people from everywhere in the LGBT community because of Out in the Vineyard, right? Internationally, I have people calling me, inviting me to wineries in Australia and France and doing that side of the business. And I knew I needed to follow this side. And so, like I said, the best way to look at it is just, I had to come out. And so I did. And I worked at it. I finally was hired as an expedition guide with a very, very wonderful company called Oceanwide Expeditions out of the Netherlands. And they didn't have to take a chance on me, but they saw I was serious about the training, saw I was committed to doing this, and they gave me a chance. And so this year, and that was 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, 3 seasons. This last trip, to come back to your question now, what was it like? What was this last season like? This season was the craziest adventure I've ever done. So we did a circumnavigation around Antarctica, basically. So I flew down and got the boat in Argentina at Ushuaia, which is at the very end of South America in Patagonia on the Beagle Channel. And we took our guests and we sailed out the Beagle Channel and then took a right and we went down to Antarctica and sailed as far south as you could go. And then you have to start sailing around the continent to New Zealand. So we started sailing actually, and this whole voyage is a 32-day sail each way to the Ross Sea, which is the famous Ross Ice Shelf, and where most of the historic exploration in Antarctica occurred, like Scott, who died trying to get to be the first person to the South Pole, the British explorer, and Amundsen, who was the Norwegian explorer who did make it, and Shackleton. And you have amazing history and historical structures there that are still there because Antarctica is so dry that wood doesn't deteriorate. It's all either frozen and just dehydrated. So you have cabins that are there from 1899. And the giant ice shelf that's 350 feet high, that's just, they call it the Great Barrier, of getting in there. And McMurdo, which is the big US base there. And so we did that sail and saw the most amazing things, whales and crazy whales I've never seen. I mean, you know, I know about them, but like southern right whales and blue whales, and we saw a pod of sperm whales breaching like humpbacks do. And so it got crazy, though. The weather was a little crazy. We had to, and we started hearing stories of COVID, right? But we had really no concept. So we're like, okay, there's a little outbreak, like influenza, whatever. And we're down at the bottom of the world, and this is now February, beginning of February or mid-February, heading for New Zealand to drop off those customers, and a new boatload's coming on. As we're getting closer to New Zealand, we hear stories of, oh, New Zealand has shut borders, so they're not letting any of the Chinese passengers come. So we were like, well, okay, fair enough. You know, if there's an epidemic outbreak in China, I wouldn't let someone in my country either. And I think we had, at that point, had 4 or 5 people booked who were from China, and the rest were from Europe. And so we're like, okay, well, that's awful for them, but it's practical. So we got everybody back on the ship. We were there in New Zealand about 15 hours and sailed out. And that was February 15th. So we go back to the Ross Sea, do some more exploring, and then we have to start sailing back around the continent. And as we get closer, although we had crazy weather, it was amazing. It was late in the year, early winter, and we're literally in it, and the ocean is freezing around us. I mean, it literally is freezing. We have to get out of there as fast as we can, or there's potential to get stuck in the ice, and that's not good. So we get back and start heading toward Argentina, and because there were times we had probably 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks each direction with no internet access. We're so far south, we're literally, when you're halfway around the western side of Antarctica, there is no internet, there's no phone, there's barely radio, and it literally is the most remote spot in the world. Not just from distance, but from people. So because you're down at the bottom of the Pacific, right? We're between South America and Australia. There's no real islands above. The islands where we were, like Hawaii. And then where there's the next people is South Pole Station. So when the International Space Station flies over, we're closer to that than we are from South Pole in terms of people, right? Because of the altitude and the distance. Mm-hmm. And so we literally are at the most remote spot on Earth. And so we had no sense of what was happening, of lockdowns, of people dying, how much dying was happening in Italy. And so we start heading toward Argentina, and we start getting all the news. And then the reports come in that countries are closing their borders. And so we get back to Ushuaia. And before we got there, Argentina had said, yes, you guys, because you've been basically under lockdown for 35 days at this point. The last stop was New Zealand, and we were there like 18 hours. You're completely free. And we had no symptoms. Nobody had anything on the ship. And we get there, and then they tell us we can't disembark, and we sat in port for 4 days. And the company trying to negotiate. And finally, the Argentinians said, sorry, if you hurry and you go to Buenos Aires, the port's still open there. So we sailed as fast as we could, which is about a 5-day sail to get to Buenos Aires. And by the time we got there, they said, sorry, too bad. We've closed the entire country, all the borders, the airports, everything. And so we're, as guides, having to sort of understand this, and we're sort of freaked out a little, but we also have to remember we have 100 passengers from around the world who are really stressing. We have a few Italians, and they're reading what's going on back home. We have some Germans. Most of the sailors are all Filipino, and the Philippines were closed. So we get to Montevideo in Uruguay, and we sit there a couple of days, and finally they say, okay, we'll let your passengers get off. And if any crew or staff have a valid ticket, they can get off. And they created what's called a sterile corridor. So it was literally off the ship, mask, gloves, literally from the gangway into a bus that had been sterilized to the airport and put on your plane. And literally they escorted the bus with sirens and police cars through Montevideo to the airport. And half of the expedition guides were able to get home. The 2 Kiwis that I worked with very closely, and one has turned out to be a very good friend, and I hate that he's straight because I have a super big crush on him, but he's a good friend. But I wanted to go there actually because I like New Zealand a lot. I knew what was happening. We started seeing the numbers in the United States, and they wouldn't let me in, even though I had been in isolation for, at this point, 5 weeks now, because I wasn't a citizen. And I found it to be frustrating because, COVID doesn't know your citizenship. It knows where you've been in terms of exposure. So at that point, the guests got off and half the ship staff, and then the rest of us got stuck having to sail north looking for a port. And we start sailing, and finally after about a week, we're trying to head for Sao Paulo, and Brazil's closed now. And we ended up having to sail another month all the way to the ship's port in the Netherlands. And at first it was exciting, right? We're going to sail around the world, basically, from New Zealand, if we take that as the starting point, all the way to Holland. We had sailed on this trip when I left the first time and back, it was almost 24,000 miles, literally around the world. And so, but off the coast of Brazil was amazing wildlife, unbelievable wildlife happening. Beautiful sunsets, really great because we just disembarked the passengers. So there was a little bit of calm, right, for all of us. And we were resolved. We're in a safe place. We have food, we have wine, we have social contact with the skeleton crew that was on board. And then we got to the equator about halfway across the voyage, and the wildlife stopped. And we don't know why. Is it overfishing? Is it normal seasonally? What is the deal? We think, okay, we're out in the middle of the ocean. There's not going to be much wildlife anyway, but surely when we get off the coast of Africa, we should start seeing wildlife again. And when we get to Gibraltar, to off the coast of Portugal, we should see things. And my guess is things are overfished. We saw hardly anything. And that made for a very long, stressful voyage because at this point, more borders are closing. We don't know what's going to happen when we get to Vlissingen, was the port city in the Netherlands where the ship is registered or is from. And we didn't know if the Dutch were going to quarantine us or have a required quarantine for another 2 weeks before we're allowed off the ship. So at this point, I'd been basically in quarantine since mid-February, and now we are at mid to late April. And we didn't know what was going to happen. We're a few days out from the Netherlands, and we get there, and they wouldn't let us off the ship at first. And then late that night, there was approval, and they said, okay, this is like 10 o'clock at night. You have to be up at 5 o'clock in the morning. Some people had to get up at 2 in the morning, and they're going to do a sterile corridor for these people. And you go from here, you're getting on a plane, and they're sending you to your countries. And that's basically what happened. I was considering trying to stay in Europe because, as you may know, I've been studying German. I was supposed to go work in the Arctic again. And basically they just said, the Arctic is not happening. Get on a plane. And they sent me home. And that's how I ended up back here in wonderful Sonoma Valley. but it was an incredible, it was a challenging experience, but a very good experience.
I have to tell you one thing, and probably you heard that from other friends when you went back to Sonoma, that the ones that we were following you over the media, we were kind of uh, not just praying that you arrive safe home, but thank God you were there, because you were not in touch with the nonsense that was happening the first
Yes.
weeks in land. You know that well, I was in Peru, of course,
Yeah.
and I've been getting the information gathering from different parts because
Yeah.
of my former travelers. And one, there are two things. One, it's that's good that Mark is in the middle of the ocean, so
Thank
he's
you.
not
Yeah.
touched by the COVID. The second, and I was lucky, not like other companies that probably you know in tourism, that they had already tours running when
Yeah.
everything started closing. And imagine my tour, that I was very lucky. My travelers were very lucky. They were supposed to arrive 3 days after they locked down Peru,
Yeah.
and
Wow.
so they never been here. We just have to rearrange times and
Yeah.
vouchers and everything. But yeah, you and especially your expedition was like, okay, at least I know one of my friends, it is in a safe place right now.
Thank you. No, thank you. And you know, I don't think any of us who were stuck on the ship really grasped the severity, right? So things are locked down and we're thinking, wow, okay, this is kind of crazy and silly, but I don't think we grasped it until I got home,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so there's a little craziness. Sure, that happens when I'm at the airport and they, whisk me away and make me wear a mask and all this stuff, which you never had to do before. And the airport in Amsterdam was absolutely empty. One of the busiest airports in Europe, empty. And so there is that weirdness as I'm trying to acclimate to what this new strange world is. Because when I left in early January, and I hadn't seen land other than Antarctica, and like I said, a few hours in New Zealand, which is itself a little island way off, that's isolated. But we had no concept of really what was happening. And or we just couldn't believe it. So we thought, okay, there's so much talk about fake news and all that stuff. We just didn't get it, because again, we spent that big crossing and we were able to eat and socialize with people, and we started reading things like my gay friends going, why can't I wish I could go out to a Sunday fun day this weekend in San Francisco, and it really is awful that things are closed, or people were shaving their heads and and I'm like, what are they doing? What is happening? But again, because we only got little pieces, because we didn't have consistent internet. And I have to say, one of the things that we were very lucky about, you'd mentioned guides being trapped, or they were supposed to come in and you had to do vouchers. We had one more expedition scheduled. When we got to Uruguay, we were supposed to offload the boat and then turn around and go back south for another 14 days. Not all the way around, but as far south as you could go, south of the Antarctic Circle. And we get there and it's shut. It's like, nope. I mean, we couldn't do it, but the company said that is canceled. Nothing is happening. And so we were very lucky. I mean, there was one or two of the guide's partners. So one of my close friends, his partner, female, straight Australian couple, she was on the Greg Mortimer, which is one of the ships that had a bunch of people die, and got locked down and couldn't get in. They were the ones who couldn't get into Florida. They had to go through the Panama Canal. They had to find a place to go, and they couldn't. And thankfully, she was okay. But colleagues got sick. People were dying on the ship. And so watching that, where it touched so close to home with my peers on other ships, we were luckier than we knew by thankfully having that crazy circumnavigation of Antarctica. We were isolated. And, the first hint of, I think, how serious it got is we were supposed to land at McMurdo Station, which is the big research base, the US research base on the other side. It's the main operations center really for all of Antarctica. Many of the countries will fly to that ice strip on the Ross Ice Shelf, and then they go to their own bases from there. But we get to it, and the US Antarctic Program and National Science Foundation basically radioed the ship and said, you can't come. And we had 100 really angry passengers, because that was a big highlight of the trip. And so a lot of what we had to do was to mitigate and do really careful customer service around that, right? And there's nothing we could do. The United States government closed the base. So there was nothing we could do about that. And, you know, we made that clear ahead of time. Any base visits are all up to what is going on at the time and up to the base commander. But here's where we're going to try to go. And we had some there was a couple really angry guests, and finally I just had to say to them, look, I totally understand, I sympathize. I mean, going to McMurdo, one thing that I did this trip as a passenger, as a content creator in 2017. I was hired by Oceanwide to go create content, and that was really another one of those other trips that just sealed the deal. And I went to McMurdo, and we went back to the ship. I said, I'm going to come work here no matter what I have to do, and if that means scrubbing toilets, I will. And the next season, I was back working at the base as a janitor. And I understand people being angry about or upset, but I had to tell them as a guide, like, I get it, but you're going to have to talk to the US government because we can't do anything about it. But it was for safety reasons, and the bases are still closed. You know, I had some friends who I'd worked with the year before who ended up doing 18 months, where most people do 4 to 5 per season, winter, summer, and they couldn't get, no people could come in or out of the base. So they had been there and they're just now leaving now, and new people are finally going in. They're currently quarantining in New Zealand. They were able to get to New Zealand, quarantine for 14 days, and then they'll all be retested and then taken to Antarctica to the base. But right now, Antarctica is COVID free.
That's wonderful to know.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
especially for the future of tourism. Let me ask you one thing about Mark, but
Yeah.
Mark the photographer.
Okay.
Because the ones that will follow you, and I'm sure there's many people that you know that there is in the audience today that knows you. How can you make these wonderful captures of? Because most of I do remember a series of penguins, and also you dressed like a penguin. How can you get that inspiration as a photographer? Because we are all entrepreneurs, and we are inspired. We get inspired from other people. Yeah. But how you can translate everything in your head in a photography?
You know, and that really is the trick. It's, for me, I want to convey what I see to people who follow me or see my photography. And sometimes it's not easy, and it's sort of an unconscious thing or some level. It's some vision appears in my head when I look and see a penguin or see something happening, and I have to find a way to capture that and get it to other people to see the world through my eyes, because it's not about vanity. It's about, there's something really special that I've never seen before, and I'm really well traveled. I want to share this with someone else and let them see what this amazing world is. So it's a matter of work, patience, an incredible amount of patience, because there are times I've stood for a shot that I've seen in my head for an hour, waiting for somebody not to step in frame, or a penguin not to cross another penguin, or something for it. And there's patience. And then, to be honest, there's luck. Some of it is luck. So one shot that is one of my favorites this last season, we were at one of the, it's called the sub-Antarctic islands. This was off Campbell Island, it's called. So the group of sub-Antarctic islands between New Zealand and Antarctica that have indigenous species, much like the Galapagos, that are only found on those islands south of New Zealand. And I'm there and I'm driving my Zodiac, and I have my camera in my bag, thank God. And I look over and something came up out of the water, and it looked very strange, and then it sunk down again. Thinking, what is that? So I have a boat of guests, and there were a couple gays on it, actually, too. And so we had fun flirting. And so I just turned the boat off and got my camera and waited, and it popped up again. I shot it, and it turned out to be a New Zealand sea lion, it's called. Otherwise, so the nickname is a hooker sea lion, with a giant squid in its mouth, or octopus with the tentacles all hanging down. And it's up out of the water, it's full head. And it was 20 meters off the Zodiac. And part of it's watching the wildlife, right? Okay, that just went down. It's probably going to come back up here shortly, judging where you think it's going to come back up, and watching bubbles and all that stuff. And so I just pointed my camera that direction. And when it came up, I just shot off like 10 shots. I didn't even know if I got anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish I had it in front of me to show you, but I got that shot. It's up there on my Facebook page and Instagram. But it's things like that that sometimes just are just luck. You know, the converse can happen though. On the trip, I think, where I wrote that article for Ed, for Man About World, I was in the Zodiac driving, and I get back on the ship, and one of the guests said, "Mark, this is for you." And it was a picture of me driving the Zodiac and looking this way, and right behind me is a giant orca surfacing right behind the boat. And I'm looking the other direction. And that was the most humiliating moment as a guide, right? I missed that. But it was, you know, it's just taking the time and patience and wanting to, like a writer, I think, right? So I'll get the pictures, and sometimes they're not right. I don't do much Photoshop work. I try to be natural, but if there's something where it doesn't convey the sense of what I saw in my head, I'll touch it a little bit. I'll do a little contrast adjustment or sharpening or something, or crop it to convey the image. Because sometimes you'll get a shot, you know, based on where you are, that'll be super wide. But, you know, we look at a point and we get the story here instead of this wide landscape, and I'll crop it down.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really about just taking the time to make sure what I'm trying to say is what is seen. You know, and like that famous saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So I don't spend the time writing 1,000 words. I spend the time making that picture convey those 1,000 words.
Will you go back to Antarctica?
Yes. Yes. In fact, I'm waiting because we're on hold at the moment, depending on what COVID's going to do, what Argentina is going to do. Yeah, it's my love. I have to go there every year. I don't know what's going to happen if we can't. I mean, I'll just deal with it, but I love it there. It's because it's so big. It's like saying, well, I go back to Europe, or will I go back to South America? You know, the peninsula on the Argentina, Chilean side, South American side is very different geographically or geologically than the New Zealand side. And so, yeah, the peninsula is the most scenic from a standpoint. It's like Yosemite. The only thing I can use is really U.S. national parks. Big mountainous, it's like the Andes, right? But you're going to go to the other side, to the New Zealand side, and that's like going to Yellowstone or vast, like the Atacama, right? It's just huge vastness. And they're both really beautiful, but they're both different, right? And so every time I go to Antarctica, and my mom has said this, and friends have said this, why do you keep going there? I've been, I don't know, 25 times or something now. And people keep saying, why do you keep going there? Isn't it the same? It's like going to the same place over and over. Every time I go, it's different. The light is different. There's no light like polar light. As a photographer, that light, you have a magic hour, that gold magic hour that lasts all night, because the sun is so low on the horizon when it's getting ready to set the first time, that it goes like this around the horizon, not over the horizon like we have here. And so you get 5 or 6 hours, and then it'll dip below the mountains and then back up. And so you have magic hour that is really like magic 6 hours. Mm-hmm. And the color changes, and it's marvelous. And then there's the people, of course. You know, the people who go on these kinds of trips, it's not like going on an Atlantis cruise, right? Not that there's anything wrong with that. Atlantis was one of the inspirations for Gay Wine Weekend, really. I mean, hanging a disco ball in a vineyard and hiring one of their DJs to come to a tea dance in a vineyard. But you have people who are well-traveled and explorers and want to get on the ground and not just party on a boat. And, you know, the people I've met have ranged from, one guy I got very close with, a little older guy, and it turned out he was Bill Clinton's speechwriter, right? And there are people who own large companies, and there are people who own small companies, or there are people who are just super well-traveled and writers, but they're interested in our world and our planet and exploring new places. And that's really hard to find, where there's this unspoken connection. Mm-hmm. And then that said, yeah, they're amazing people that I've met, friends for life down there.
Well, so what is still in Mark's bucket list?
What is on my, oh my gosh. So, well, I have to find a new husband, I guess, but who likes the cold, right? And that's a hard call for the gays, right? But actually, surprisingly, I've met quite a few people. You know, not so much on the ships because again, people think that's more of a roughneck kind of industry. But at McMurdo at the base, I met quite a few guys who basically came out there. There was more gay action there than I expected. And it was, people felt safe. They were so far away from home. They were away from their parents and their religions and the expectation put on them that they finally started to discover themselves in a safe environment. And that's great. My bucket list now includes, for Antarctica, there's a place in the Weddell Sea on the east side of the peninsula that's called Snow Hill. And it's one of the largest emperor penguin colonies in the world. And you can really only get there by helicopter. So that's on the list.
Mm-hmm.
But my goal for my life is I want to hit 100 countries. And Antarctica, I was on a good pace to do it by now, but Antarctica has stopped me cold, as it were. I'm at about 67 at this point, but it's not going up anymore because Antarctica keeps getting in the way for months at a time. And then I go to the Arctic now. I'm doing both. And when I was able to release Out in the Vineyard, now I go back and forth. I make a joke that I'm truly bipolar. So I'm going from the North Pole to the South Pole, the North Pole to the South Pole, and in between I'm here in Sonoma or I'm in Germany studying German for work, actually, because a lot of German speakers go travel cold
Mm-hmm.
climates, whereas not quite as many Southern European travelers go to Antarctica. But the Germans will like charter entire ships. But so I have to hit 100 countries. There's some adventure things that I want to do. Well, one, I need to go to Machu Picchu. I've never been to Peru. I've never been to Machu Picchu, and I ain't getting any younger. So I got to hit that elevation before it starts to be a problem.
I have to
And
take you on the Inca Trail for sure.
yes, I
You
don't
will be
want
the
to.
perfect client. You will be the perfect traveler for the Inca Trail.
I hope so. I hope so. As long as you got some good wine, we can throw in there too.
Oh, that's not a problem.
Right. That's taken for granted. Or some good piscos, right? You bring those, and
If
we'll.
I'm part of the excursion, for sure it's going to be wine or rum or pisco. So that's
Right. Well, I
that's not
wouldn't
enough.
go without you. You have to be the guide up there. You have to take me up there.
They
Right?
said that.
Right. You heard that before, right? And then there's some other adventures. If I ever get the opportunity in the world, there's things like, have you heard of the Mongol Rally? Do you know about that?
No.
It's not a race, it's a rally. So it's a big fundraiser for like schools in England. And people form teams and they can only spend something like 1,500 euros on a car. And it's a car race from UK to Vladivostok in Siberia. All the way, and you drive all the way across, and it takes a few months. And this happens every year. It's called the Mongol Rally. You have to go find your own path, and you go through Eastern Europe and through all the stands, Kazakhstan, into Mongolia, and then into to Vladivostok. So that's been on the list for about 10 years. And I met this Australian couple on the ship this year who actually did it on the motorcycles and said it was amazing. So that's there. But the next adventure for Mark, when things are open, is back to Antarctica.
Definitely to hear you is just you want us to go out to have our passport ready. It was a pleasure to hear you, Mark. I
Thank you for
cannot
having me.
let you go
Okay.
without asking you something, or actually, well, you
Yeah.
leave a complete advice for entrepreneurs already.
Yeah.
But what would be your advice for those people that want to start a business? Because when we talk about business, people think that it's only, it's only about the pocket. Of course, everything in our wallet it's good for surviving.
Yeah.
But entrepreneur is also, people like you that pursue their dreams. So what
Yeah.
can you tell them?
The biggest thing that I had to overcome is fear, my own fear. So don't listen to naysayers. If you have something and know it in your heart, find a way to do it and it will happen. And if you fail, keep going because you learned from that. And at the end of the day, you'll keep surviving and you'll keep living and you'll keep eating and you'll keep breathing. And then you do what you love. And when I'm in Antarctica, like this trip that we just circumnavigated the continent, that was 4 months straight without a day off, 15, 18 hours a day, sometimes in minus 30 or 40 degree weather. And I loved every minute of it. And it didn't feel like work to me. It felt like permanent vacation. And so when out in the vineyard was like that too. Out in the vineyard, it's hard work to get that market going, but it was fun. And when I see those smile on those, all 500 people from around the world coming, 800, nearly 1,000 from around the world coming to this event and smiling when they see that disco ball in the vineyard and the DJ playing, and that's what does it. So my advice is, don't listen to naysayers. People who tell you you're crazy, they're the ones who are doing their 9 to 5 and they're miserable. Follow your heart. Take the risk, because what's the worst that can happen? You go back to your cubicle and go back to a corporate job. Do what you love and think outside the box. You know, people sometimes get stuck of, well, I don't know what I'm going to do, so I have to stay in this job at McDonald's, or I have to stay in this job at my corporate job or marketing. You know what? What I've learned with doing Out in the Vineyard and meeting all of these people on expedition is there are so many ways of living. It doesn't have to be what your parents tell you or what you've been told in school or all the programming we've had of what success is supposed to mean. I mean, like I said, I had a husband, I had a really nice house and pool and in wine country, and we called it Sonoma Swim Club, and I had lots of friends and things, but you know what, at the end of the day, it didn't mean anything to me like this means to me. And so I went for it, and I could fail at some point, but I've had a really great time doing it.
I think you're in a great path. You are inspiring a lot of people, and you probably don't know that, but I'm one of them. I'm one of them,
well, thank
especially
you.
in your photography.
Thanks.
I wish I have, you know, I am pretty good at photography, but I would like to expand those, you know, horizons like you are doing.
Thanks.
And
I think you just got to keep doing it. So for people who want to do photography, just keep doing it. Just keep doing it and show your vision. Don't try to figure out. It's one of the things with Instagram and other sort of amateur photographers I see is they constantly post what everybody else is posting, or they do the same shot and they get to that place where everybody has that Instagram shot. You know what? Take the shot that's different. If you've seen that shot, yeah, it's in your head, but you've seen it 1,000 times at Machu Picchu. Take a different shot. Let me see what that looks like. And that's what is going to tell a story.
Yes, be different for sure.
Yeah.
Mark, thank you so much. Thank you so much
for your time. Having me on. I appreciate
for being
it.
part of our event.
I still got that pisco you sent me.
You still have it?
I do.
Oh
I never drank it.
All right.
I kept finding myself in Antarctica.
Well, that will be a reason to go or visit you there in California or go to Antarctica.
Yes,
one or the other. But for those who are following us in Entrepreneurs LGBTQ interviews, hang around. And we're going to say, bye, Mark. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Aaron. Adios.